Hello and welcome to the latest edition of QTalks, an online on-demand series of conversations around the future of water powered by Katium. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. And the topic of this month's discussion is cybersecurity, myths and realities. So there's certainly been a lot of hype and progress and even news upon the implementation of digital solutions when it comes to how water is treated and distributed. There's now the ability to get more granular detail and insights and data on the process that simply wasn't available over a decade ago. But what price does this have on the security of water networks? Water utilities are mandated to protect public health, and with this comes the data as well. So as we've seen, with the adoption of new technologies such as digital networks, remote operations, real-time sensors, and data acquisition analytics, this means water systems are potentially not as digitally secure as they once used to be. So it kind of raises a question, and one that we'll hopefully answer by the end of this 30 minutes, is whether cybersecurity is in fact the elephant in the room when it comes to water's digital journey. So as usual with these Q Talks, we have a fantastic, experienced, well-rounded and versed panel of experts to discuss on the topic. This month we have a utility, a consultant, and one of Europe's leading infrastructure companies. So I'm pleased to welcome Roger Caslow, who's the Chief Information Security Officer with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, known as HRSD. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you.
We have Paula González Domínguez, who's the Digital Transformation of Acciona from Spain. Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Ervin, the Global Cybersecurity Director for Utilities of Power and Water and Manufacturing within 1898 and Co, part of Burns and McDonald. Eric, good to see you and welcome.
Good day.
So we're going to try and break this session into three key areas. One is around the impact of water's digitalization of all the networks. The second one's going to be around the culture shift, the training of personnel and internal. And then finally, the lessons learned from recent changes or advice given. So firstly, then, why don't we kickstart with you, Roger, from our utility representative on the board around the digitalization of water with more sensors being integrated and data being generated. Can you give us a kind of overview of that and really what impact that's having on your job and the network and plant security as well?
I started this journey in the water space specifically, moving from oil and gas and power into water with General Electric, and then with Suez, which became a part of it, and then now actually having the utility versus being a supplier too with the technology sets. But the digitization of water, and when we talk smart water or we talk the metering, et cetera, we're talking a whole different level where most of the I call them the normal side of this, the normal engineering has never thought of where this data is going to, how this data is going to be worked, how this is going to be worked in. And not everyone has a GDPR to worry about. We don't have that here when it comes to privacy. So I'll set privacy to the side for a moment if I may, because it's just the cybersecurity part of it to protect forget the customer data, again, if I may, and we're just going to focus on the ability to do mission, which is to treat brown water, make brown water into potable water to tap, however that might work. So a lot of this hasn't been engineered in the right way you would normally find it in, say, a power generation cycle, right? So the Purdue model is the norm for the power generation space. It is less the norm in the oil and gas, but is becoming the norm, but is so far removed from the norm in the water and wastewater space that it has to be a push in. So it's an after-fact engineering challenge to integrate this. And the more sensors that are placed at the pump stations, at the various plants and treatment cycle places, and then the need to find a good solid partner within the space to do security monitoring and add additional sensors, right, to do security monitoring, whether that be a known commodity like a Nozomi or a Dragos or or a Clarity or many of the others that are out there to do those things. But it's an engineering problem to get those things solved for. Unfortunately, a lot of the engineers don't understand the problem well enough, and that's where they have to find someone like myself who's been in the business for more than a couple days, right? So there's part of it.
Roger, thank you. Yeah, I think you summed it up well. It's the challenge of retrofitting the cybersecurity, and often you're going to have sensors from different organizations as well. So you've got that sort of interoperability challenge as well that comes with it. But in terms of the skill set and the right people, we're going to come onto that a little bit later on. But let's bring you in, Paula, then from Acciona, because you look across water as one component of what you do, as well as transport and other areas. So why don't you kind of give us an update on how Acciona sees this within the water side of the business?
Well, we see that digitalization in the water sector, it has a lot of opportunities and it has a lot of improvements as soon as you link them to technology. But also this is also creating new challenges regarding cybersecurity. So when we talk about digitalization, maybe it's not so obvious what we can do when we put like new sensors or new technologies into water plants. But we are seeing how efficiency it's increasing, how we are reducing risk, how we are optimizing materials, how we are reducing waste. So it's clear that connecting water plants also with other kind of infrastructures or other products that we or services that we have in Acciona is bringing completely clear benefits, but also have these challenges because as soon as you introduce new technologies, for example, you introduce cloud technologies or you introduce IT technologies in environments that are traditionally more industrial, you are mixing like two different worlds. So what does this mean? It means that maybe you need to rethink your whole structure, how you think about the networks, the people that are working there, and of course the challenges that you are facing, the threats that you need to face when you are talking only about the physical space that used to be the water plants. It's completely different when you think about the digital space that now are coming into the plants. So this is the part of new challenges that, as you said, they are linked to culture, that we will talk about this later. It's totally related to technology, as Roger has mentioned, but it also includes investment, it also includes awareness, it also includes regulation. So we are in a quite challenging but also very interesting time to be talking about this.
Yeah, I think you summed up well. You said it's interesting challenges, but also there's an opportunity there to help progress as well. Well, great stuff. Thank you, Paula. So let's bring in Eric then, because you perhaps work with numerous clients and different utilities, so you can take a step back and see a broad perspective. But how would you respond then in terms of water's digital journey and the increasing threat of cybersecurity? How do you sort of see that recently?
Yeah, so there's certainly been a dramatic shift here just in the last couple of years, and all it takes is, more and more news stories to come up. There was just a recent water breach here in the UK that was just announced a couple of days ago, and so they're trying to become, smarter with the data that they have so they can become more efficient in their operations. And so with that, we're seeing these devices being scattered across these large geographic areas, which further increases the attack surface. In addition, these devices are sharing information, like Roger said, with control systems, but also with the back end business side of the business, so they can massage that data, make business decisions on that data. And so when we start to see, the attack surface open like this, that's where we start to see vulnerabilities arise and exploits, taken advantage of. And so right now, the big thing is there's a tremendous amount of, SCADA replacement initiatives going on across the water sector is what we're seeing. And so with that, there's an opportunity to start to design security into those control systems. And so, and that there's a whole life cycle to that. I'll talk a little bit about, the familiarity with the electric sector and kind of where they were 10 years ago. And so there was a dramatic push there, and it took a few incidents, to really drive the industry. And now there's a regulation out there in most organizations now that help drive a certain level of maturity in the cyberspace. And so we're starting to see that happen with water as well. And with that, we'll see some maturation occurring in the space.
I like how you phrase the attacks. I guess the attack surface has really broadened. So I guess you're referring to operators with mobile devices, with iPads in the field, beyond the actual control rooms and the static PC. So that's an interesting development over the last decade. Okay, so I know you've all kind of touched upon it, but I think there's a phrase that I'd like to bring in, and that's creating the cyber resilience internally within teams. I mean, we often talk about water companies being resilient against climate change, whether it's, as we're seeing at the moment, this historic drought across Europe and having supplies dwindling, through to the impact of heavy rainstorms and having the influx of too much water. But actually, what about creating the skill set and experience to be cyber secure and cyber resilience internally? So, Roger, you mentioned then about your perhaps varied background and your origin story to lead you to where you are. So how are you approaching that from a utility point of view? Are you looking to recruit people similar to you or to train people up? Tell us how you're going about it from a staff point of view.
Well, the world should thank itself. There's very few people similar to me. But it would be nice if there were people who had the ICS experience as well as the cybersecurity experience. But there's very few of us out there that have that. So no, we have to train from within and make people smart from within. Working with engineering staff to bring them smarter. To bring them up to a different level. Right now, these are engineers. These are professional engineers. These people have a degree in engineering, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're smart. To bring them into that space, to bring operators, to bring people up to speed in my automation, my instrumentation, all of the rest of the space that's only on the OT side. It's a similar endeavor as we would on the business side of the house, and whether the finance or HR or these other functions, where we have to make them kind of cyber savvy. But in the industrial control side, they're already a little cautious about making changes, which is a good thing. But to bring them up and understand, no, you can't bring your personal iPad and attach it to the network, regardless of the fact that it says Wi-Fi is available. You need to be able to follow certain protocols, and know we're also the need to truly segment network out, and truly pull that off, to take away the ability for someone to do something that is I want to say the ID10T error, right? For someone to accidentally, if you spell ID10T out, it spells idiot. But that's okay. It's a cybersecurity joke that it's too old. But it's to keep them from doing those errors, those issues, if just by accident. And that's not even addressing the malicious insider threat that is potentially always an addition to the mix, right? So we just have to bring them through. We at HRSD, we're focused on putting even our industrial controls people, our industrial automation people, through things like SANS 410, right? Now, SANS 410, if you're familiar, is very basic. It is, you must be this high to ride this ride, basic, when it comes to understanding IT and OT, right? But it still gives that level of trust, or builds that level of trust, because it is trust, to support the security around the ability to operate. And again, Eric, you hit it on, I believe, when you mentioned about the energy space. But really, you know, water is more akin to oil and gas, right? Because of the process flows, the physics of everything, how it works. And we're also, you know, they're a little ahead of us, and we're trying to play catch up as they're running to catch. Everybody's trying to catch up to power, right? Which is trying to catch up to nuke, because everybody wants to be as safe as nuke, right? But no one has the budget to be as safe as nuke. So we're doing it that way. If that answers your question at all, there, Tom.
Yeah, no, it definitely does, Roger. I mean, it sounds as if you mentioned bringing engineers along the journey that I guess even for you is continually evolving, because cyber threats by their very nature are continually evolving, right? I remember we covered this for Aquatech Online fairly recently, and one consultant told us it's evolved from a data theft issue, which still evolves, through to a kind of denial of service issue in recent years, right? So as you mentioned at the start, you've got the data component, you know, you've got people's billing details, address details, which you have to keep completely safe.
Correct.
But then on top of that, you've got the denial of service, right? People getting in, operating things, which is a huge cyber threat as well. So it's a case of bringing the teams internally along on that. Okay, Paula from Acciona, can you perhaps reflect on Roger's comments in terms of bringing engineers along the journey and also perhaps facing some resistance internally as well, and how you've overcome that?
Totally. Actually, I want to link it too with what Eric mentioned about the attack surface. As we said, as soon as you are increasing the type of attacks that you can have, the elements that can be attacked, you also need a wider range of skills to beat these threats. So you need good engineers, but they probably will understand easily technology, and probably they will understand technology threats. But nowadays it's becoming more and more important other kind of threats, like social engineering, which has almost nothing to do with technology, because for them, it can be very intuitive why they need to use an antivirus in their laptops, why they need to secure their devices. However, people working in plants, for example, maybe will not find so intuitive why they should go all the time with a third party that is visiting the plant, or why they shouldn't take an USB that they find on the floor and connect it to anywhere, because they have not been trained for it. It's not in their roots, let's say. So it's also our job to make this obvious and to help them to understand why this is important and why the role of everyone is important. Because it's very popular to say that the chain always breaks in the weakest link. And as soon as we are all involved in these two worlds of the OT and the IT, all of us are responsible. So if one person doesn't have all the skill sets in cybersecurity, probably this person will be a point of failure or the weak link. So it's a big challenge to see first which kind of education we need to provide, or which kind of training, then which people needs it. In water plants, it can also be a challenge because you are not always the owner of the plant. Probably you're operating it or you're running it, but you don't own it. So this also has a huge correlation with what you define in your contracts, what it is your capabilities, or what is your chance to train the people working there. So this is something that we need to think and that we need to address in a very easy but also comfortable manner, so everyone understands and is capable to have the skills and the tools to be facing all these complex environments.
I think the chain analogy is excellent, because there's arguably more links that keep being added to the chain, whether they're connected devices or new members of team, or even people who have been trained on cybersecurity and then move on and you have someone else coming in. So it's a good analogy. Okay, Eric, from your side, because again, you're dealing with energy and water utilities. As Roger mentioned, we're kind of playing catch up a little bit to energy, who's playing catch up to nuclear. So how do you see this in terms of the culture shift and change needed, and also overcoming that potential resistance?
It's a great question. And I'll kind of go back to, for most critical infrastructure companies, the majority of them have safety in their mission statement or a core value. It's safety first. And so it's an evolution to get security into that statement. And so safety and security first. And so by doing that, you can leverage, if you have like a corporate IT department who has a cybersecurity function, they may have, some initial, like training that they do on a annual basis or quarterly basis. So tap into that if you're on the OT side, and really start to see where the opportunities are within your own organizations. If you can't do that, there's a lot of online resources that are free. And so you can start out with certain things like asset identification. How are you going to protect assets if you don't even know, what that list of assets is? And especially on the digital side, as these continue to just expand, rapidly across our operating environments, you got to know what assets you have. And so by doing that, then you can just take simple steps and help people understand how, cyber could be related to, other areas of their focus. And so, protecting, if you plug in a device, like Roger said, in, your phone to charge it, for example, into an OT or ICS system, one of the computers that's operating the water treatment facility, for example, you're creating a risk there for, malware or bad files to transition from one device to another. And so certain practices are just easy to help communicate and educate the user base on what it takes just to be cyber secure for the environment. But take advantage of the different resources out there, and then understand how little things can make a really big difference. Most often, the cyber breaches occur from a human, mishap. And so whether that was misconfiguration or a phishing a phishing attempt that led to a actual click and we've seen that over and over and over. And I think the ransomware, kind of outbreak, is a really good example of that too, that's going on all over the place. And so just take advantage of some of the, resources that are available within your own organization, those free resources that are out there, and then if you get to a certain level of maturity, bringing an organization in or sending your staff off to training like a SANS course, for example, or ISA 62443, which is a really great set of cyber standards that's an international standard, so you can look at the core components and the core domains for cybersecurity.
Very good. Thanks, Eric. Well, I guess you mentioned it only sort of takes one kind of mistake from someone internally for there to be a breach. So there's a need to be vigilant the whole time. Great stuff. So finally then, in terms of the kind of the lessons learned and other sectors we can look to, in that same article I mentioned, one consultant said that water's about 10 years behind the financial sector. And you mentioned there, Roger, around nuclear as well. But can you talk us through a kind of change or something you've implemented recently within Hampton Roads Sanitation District that other utilities watching can kind of take away, something that you implemented was successful and you can share the story behind as well?
Well, first off, let me say that behind the financial sector, that's quite interesting because the person has no clue how they're comparing apples to oranges there. Because having formerly worked at JP Morgan Chase, I can say without a doubt, we had no industrial controls. We had no SCADA system, right? So that's kind of a weird analogy or a weird comparison. But I was brought in to build the cybersecurity program here at HRSD. We have a national security impact with the Norfolk Navy base here. We have a lot of other activities going on here, tourism, etc., Virginia Beach and whatnot. So I'm building the program. I've begun with implementing a lot of the similar principles that I would do on a normal business IT security side, but with different partners, right? So, for example, I'm currently implementing. We've already segmented off with a level 3.5 Purdue model DMZ, monitored DMZ. Segment that off. And then furthermore, the homogenization and the working with our partner, our SCADA partner, and our DCS partner, it's one and the same. We've homogenized our system for SCADA and DCS. That was being in the works before I showed up. But that's what they're doing here because they understood that was a good thing to get everything with one single profile. People may say, well, that may not be good for redundancy, but the reality is if you have homogenized partnerships, few partners to work with, that means you know exactly what dog to kick, throat to punch, whatever you want to go with, right? Because you know your target, you know who you're working with, and you have those relationships. And that's what's important. It's those relationships versus working with 5 different partners if you have 5 different SCADA solutions and 6 different partners with the DCS level and all those other things and making it all over the place. It's bad enough that most water utilities have at least every flavor of PLC you can imagine out there. and standardizing on that. So that and the security monitoring with our partners. And I'm gonna have to say it, but I mentioned Dragos earlier. We use Dragos. Not that they're the best for everyone, but they're the best for us. And that's the important part. Find a solution, a security partner who's the best for you. And that's the cultural fit, the ability to respond and have an incident response retainer, which is a concept that's the norm for the business side to have an IRR, but not so much has been the norm for the operational technology space. So we have an incident response retainer, monitoring in place, treating the operational technology environment like an information technology environment to a point, right? There's no such thing as Patch Tuesday coming out on us, not anytime soon. But it's treating it like that and taking very much similar principles in place there while making the segmentation, the clear demarcation and segmentation to ensure that people aren't relying on the quote-unquote air gap that does not exist. The air gap is a fallacy, and it doesn't exist anywhere that I've worked or seen. Now, it doesn't mean just because I've never seen a unicorn doesn't mean they may not exist, but I'm going to put it on an edge and say that the unicorns aren't real, right? But to that point, so that's the things we're doing here, and we're educating the operational technology workforce. I have to the point where I know when me or my team are on a call with engineering or with a third party interested in making changes to say our scale system or whatnot, they're raising their hand going, wait a second, that might present a cybersecurity issue. And I just have to sit back in my chair and go, there we go. Perfect. Somebody else is speaking for me. I don't have to say it. And then it comes back to me to look at the legitimate controls that could be impacted or the risk that needs to be mitigated in a way, or the fact that no, the thing can't be done because they would have to do X, Y, and Z before they could do that. So those are the types of things. Again, the awareness campaign, the awareness and knowledge so that people are speaking up on the cybersecurity division's part and saying, whoa, stop, we need to do a security assessment. And there's not a single security professional in the room saying that. That's good news. That is a beautiful thing. And that's where every organization should want to be. So that everyone's thinking, I don't know exactly what's wrong, but something more than likely is. So let's elevate this to the CISO in his group so he can handle this and they can talk this through, right, and solution for it. And then again, the SIM principles, right, that we'd use in the business side.
Great stuff, Roger. So it's basically making sure that cybersecurity has a voice at the table, even though there might not be a cybersecurity professional at the table. It's still front of mind for everyone having those discussions throughout the team. That's a really interesting point. As well as perhaps when it comes to partnerships, sometimes less is more when it comes to being cyber secure.
Is the important part, and I've taken that philosophy as few partners as possible. I can count all my security partners on one hand across my entire enterprise, one hand. and I know exactly who to go to for what, and I'm getting as much juice from the squeeze as possible on each and every solution to ensure that I'm not patchwork quilting my solution out to the point where I have network issues or connectivity issues or et cetera. Yes.
Well, cybersecurity is fundamentally about trust, as you mentioned. And when if you've got 4 or 5 partners, it's easier to have that better relationship. Whereas if you have 20 partners,
Yes.
it's going to be hard to do that. So great stuff. Okay, Paula, from your side, in terms of, because you have that beautiful position to look across divisions, of which, as I mentioned, waters is one. So even perhaps, can you comment on the knowledge sharing between departments, between divisions within Acciona, and how water's perhaps benefiting from that?
I think, retaking what you have just mentioned about trust, I think this is a very, very important and interesting point, because trust is not only healthy for cybersecurity when we are talking about partners, but it's also important when we are talking with our team, because people are so afraid of cyber attacks that it's not rare that when someone clicks on a phishing link or does something that maybe is wrong, the first reaction is to be scared. It's like, oh my God, I've made a mistake. Maybe they are going to fire me. Maybe the company is in a problem. So it depends on how this person has been educated on cybersecurity or which tools have to use. That they will react in one another way. We can think if this person is scared, probably they will try to hide. They will try to fix the mistake by themselves. They will try to hide it. They will ask to a person they trust, hey, help me with this because I've made a mistake. We want to avoid this mindset. We don't want to punish the people that are making mistakes. We want to identify what is the lack of knowledge to be able to provide them tools, to provide them training, and to provide them trust. Because if a person does something wrong, like clicking on a phishing link or, like connecting something they should not connect to the plant, we want that in the moment they realize, they go straight to us and they say, hey, sorry, I've done this. How do I solve this? Because this is the most efficient way and the way you harm the less the company. But for this, it's important that they can trust you and they know that you will help them to do this better. For that, I also wanted to link that for us, one of the best lessons learned that we have is that we should not wait to have lesson learned. Because when we talk about water, this is such an important thing that we are not talking about other kind of stuff that is not essential in our lives. We are talking about the elements that is common to all the lives in our planet. So we are talking about human and natural health. So if something goes wrong, if you have a cyber attack, you're not only losing money, you're not only losing jobs, you are maybe harming human lives. So it's incredibly important to us to not wait to learn from our mistakes, but to be all the time auditing, as my other peers in this conversation mentioned. You need to be anticipating. You need to be all the time listening, reading, and investigating which are the new trends. You can be up to date every day. And we like to use as a reference like the reference of a castle. If you only protect the headquarters, if you only protect the high castle, but then you don't take care of the fields, and you lose all the grain and all the food of the village is missing, at some point the castle will also be hungry and will also have nothing to eat from. So it is as important to protect what we see, or the headquarters and the main offices, as much as it is to protect our workers, the plants, and every single link included in this chain.
Great stuff. Thank you, Paula. And I think one of the key things you said there is about eliminating fear around cybersecurity, because mistakes do happen, right? I mean, we're bombarded every day, even myself, with phishing links from made-up banks and everything. So as long as people are aware, they're in a culture of understanding where mistakes do happen and they can reach out for support as soon as possible. Okay, Eric, bring us home for the final concluding words, if you will, just in terms of lessons learned. And I think what Paula mentioned is it's better not to perhaps learn the hard way, but things do happen in this topic we're talking about. So yeah, how do you see this?
Someone once told me, don't ever let a crisis go to waste. So there's an opportunity to learn from that. And so, but no, in regards to like the evolving regulatory landscape, it's really important for the entire organization to understand the shift that's going on with cyber around, especially around the expectations. And so we can learn from other sectors such as power, that we mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of different sectors that we can learn from, as we shift the focus to water and really kind of raise the bar for cybersecurity in water and wastewater. Roger mentioned something I wanted to key on here as well. So partners. There are hundreds and hundreds of cybersecurity vendors out there, and it can be difficult to wade through those. And so if you can work with your SCADA provider, your ICS provider, and understand who the key partners are for them and how to fully integrate these and maximize your return on investment. So a lot of these tools, they have a lot of different capabilities. Understand what those capabilities are before you go out and look at a point solution. And so every time you add another solution, it may be closing a niche kind of gap, but it's going to take resources, i.e. people, to manage that tool. And so sometimes the investment of the capability isn't worth the resource load that it takes on your team. So really kind of hone down and identify what tools you really need in your environment. And I'll talk about the landscape there. And so again, do you know what your digital landscape is, in your OT and ICS environment? It's changing for most organizations rapidly right now. So what type of change management practices do you have in place around that? Can you see it? So Roger also mentioned Dragos and Clarity and Nozomi, and there's a lot of different vendors out there that do those types of things. Really important for you to see what's going on. That way you can respond before it hopefully, impacts operations. Then you got to identify, your blind spots and address those blind spots. Hopefully through existing tools or existing partnerships, have someone come in on a periodic basis and conduct an assessment, so you get that third party view, and maybe you will even want to go so far as having a penetration test. Those are all different kind of maturity steps you take along the way. But after that, it's really kind of just baking it into a program. You're never complete, finished with a cybersecurity. It's constantly, evolving, and you're never done. But what you can do is use that continuous feedback loop to continue to mature and improve as an organization, and that's from the intern that just started to your most senior executive. Everybody's got a part in cybersecurity. And so really just creating that continuous security program that you can, just bake in, very similar to, like I said, safety early on. So make sure that security is just a part of your fabric of your organization.
I think that's a nice follow-on from Paula, because you mentioned the Caslow analogy, but actually everyone at the organization has a role to play. And as you said, Roger, to make sure that it's front of mind in all the discussions that are happening as well. So that's a really interesting kind of collective point to finish on. Well, we've come to the end of our allotted time. We've gone over. It was running really well, so I didn't want to cut anyone too short. But a big thank you to you, Roger, to Paula, and to Eric for your excellent viewpoints on cybersecurity. I think, as we've all discussed, it's continually evolving, but with that, there's also an opportunity to make sure that the digital strategy is aligned with the cybersecurity strategy for the long term as well. So thank you to everyone for watching the latest edition of QTalks, and we'll be back next month with another edition focusing on the role of the operator with digital opportunities available. So thank you for your time, and look forward to you tuning in for the next one.